Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and today we're doing Wheellocks 101. I've covered some of these in the past, and people are always really curious about them. They're a weapon system that's very foreign to what we have today. So I figured, let's take a chance here and take a closer look at this one and do some shooting and discuss its history, and mechanics for that matter. Now, this particular Wheellock is actually a hunting rifle that is owned and actively used by a friend of mine named Mike Carrick, who's an editor for Arms Heritage magazine. Definitely a thing to check out if you're looking for more information on interesting historical guns. This particular rifle was manufactured in 1991 by a guy named Earl Wyatt in New Zealand. So it is most definitely a modern reproduction. It's got a high quality steel barrel, it's got good sights on it, but it's designed in the exact style of a 1600s German hunting rifle. In fact, in the style of one that I did a video on not that long ago. So one of the first questions that always seems to come up with people when they look at a gun like this is, how do you hold that? Because it looks really awkward with this stuff going on and this thing on the butt plate. Well, the answer is, you actually, while it looks awkward, you hold it kind of like it looks like you ought to. So you got 3 finger grooves here, plus a space for your trigger finger, and then it just comes up into your shoulder, like so. Now, the reason that there's this steel ball on the butt plate is to protect the butt plate itself when you're putting the gun on the ground. So you can stand it on that ball, and that takes all the brunt of being scratched up on the ground. And the reason you need to do that a lot is because this is a muzzle-loaded rifle. So historically, we know these were around at least as early as 1512, because there's a surviving royal declaration from Maximilian I forbidding ownership of these to people in, I honestly don't remember what country, but it's a surviving decree, and it tells us that the guns certainly existed as early as 1512, which means they probably existed earlier. At this time period, in the 1500s, the typical military firearm was actually a matchlock. And the idea behind a matchlock is it's an extremely simple muzzle-loading rifle. You've got a touch hole at the back, and you literally carry a lit, smoldering match. Usually this would be like an ammonia-soaked piece of rope or twine. And you touch that into the flash hole, and it sets off the gun. That was reliable and it was cheap, but it had some downsides. Namely, you had to be wandering around with a lit match all the time. And so, of course, if you lost track of it, got distracted by something else, the match could go out, and then you'd have to light it again. And by the way, in 1500, you couldn't just be carrying around a pack of Bic lighters. It also had the potential hazard of, well, you're also carrying a powder horn full of black powder, and if you manage to carelessly get your lit match into your black powder, say when you're loading the gun, it goes kaboom and it blows you up, and that's a problem. Now, the Wheellock offered an alternative to a lot of those problems, although it brought its own problems instead. So the advantage of a Wheellock was that you could wind it up and have it ready under spring tension to fire with the powder pan closed, protected from the elements, and you could carry this around loaded and not have to pay attention to it the way you would with a matchlock. The downside was these are a little less reliable to actually fire than matchlocks. It's not uncommon to pull the trigger and have the wheel spin and it just goes pih, and nothing happens. In addition, in the 1500s and 1600s, you didn't exactly have modern manufacturing technology. So there were a lot of issues with low quality materials, low quality barrels, low quality springs. Easy to have a spring that doesn't quite have the right heat treat to it and it loses tension. All of those things can cause major problems on a gun like this. So these kind of tended to remain guns for the wealthier folks in society. This wasn't a peasant's rifle. Now, they were actually used by knights in armor on horseback, the guys we always normally think of as riding around with swords. Well, those guys recognized that firearms, and Wheellocks in particular, were quite effective weapons. You're not going to be riding around on a horse with a matchlock. That's really awkward and problematic, but you certainly could do so with a Wheellock or a pair of Wheellocks. And this is where our concept of the cavalry carbine really actually begins. It was this, not quite a full-length rifle like this one, but a shorter carbine or musketoon that could be carried by a soldier on horseback or a knight, or alternatively, a pair of Wheellock pistols. Not uncommon to have a pair of holsters on the saddle of your horse, carry a pair of pistols there. That concept actually came right down through history, through things like the Walker Dragoon pistols and the Rothsteyr 1907 cavalry pistols. But it began with Wheellocks. The typical military rifle of the time remained a matchlock, though. There were some military forces that were equipped with Wheellocks, There are castles in Europe that are full of literally thousands of these from various military forces. But in general, it would have been matchlock simply because of the reduced cost and the simplicity. And the Wheellock kind of stayed this dead end of development, and it wasn't replaced. The matchlock was ultimately replaced by the flintlock in military service. By the middle of the 1700s, these were pretty well obsolete. Pretty much everyone had gone over to flintlocks. They're more expensive than a matchlock, but they're a lot cheaper than this, and they're more reliable than one of these. So most of the surviving Wheellocks tend to be kind of fancy sporting guns purchased by kind of wealthy people in the 1500s and 1600s and maybe into the early 1700s. The last one that I'm aware of being manufactured was in 1829, not counting reproduction type guns like this one. And so that's pretty much the period of the Wheellock, 1500s into the 1600s. So the way this works mechanically, on a flintlock, you've got a piece of flint striking against steel and creating sparks. On a Wheellock, you have a serrated steel wheel that's spinning against a piece of iron pyrite, better known as fool's gold. You can actually see a little bit of the gold here. The rest of this is all sooty because we've been shooting it today. But what you would do is you actually have a spanner wrench and you have to wind up this wheel. Inside the action, you have a very long leaf spring and then a chain connected to the wheel and the spring. And when you wind this, what you're actually doing is winding that chain up, so the spring is being pulled up. When you pull the trigger, the wheel is released, the spring pulls down, and the chain spins this thing up, kind of like a yo-yo. Now, in order to set it, I have to first pull this rear trigger that basically locks the trigger mechanism in the wheel. And then I have my spanner wrench here that fits on the square hub of the wheel, and it's going to be about a 3/4 turn, like that. It's going to lock in place, and now the wheel is sprung, loaded, and ready. What I would do next is pour some powder into my priming pan here. You can see there's a flash hole right there. And then, when I'm ready to fire, I drop the pyrite down in contact with the wheel, pull the trigger, the wheel is going to spin, friction against the pyrite is going to create sparks. That will ignite this powder charge, which will then go through the flash hole and ignite the main charge. And spin the wheel here for you guys just so you can see what happens. It's actually a little bit, not quite as remarkably impressive as you might be expecting. It is only 3/4 of a turn, but that's enough for that steel wheel to create sparks against the pyrite. All right. So the first thing we need to do is load powder. This is a .58 caliber rifled gun, and its standard full powder charge is 100 grains of 3F or 2F, although its owner prefers 3F, black powder. Although we're going to use like a 75 grain charge today, because we're not actually trying to shoot an animal. Typically you'd have a powder horn, but we're just taking our measured charge of powder, dumping it down the bore. There we go. Now, typically you would also use a cloth patch around the ball, but the balls we have today are pretty much the exact bore diameter. They're a nice tight fit. So I'm going to put that in there, and I'm going to have the sprue mark facing straight up to give best accuracy. We have this 2-part loading tool. The first part here is used to seat the ball, which I mostly did by hand. And then you have a starter rod, push it that far in. Once we've got it that far in, we transition to the full-length rod to ram the ball all the way down the action. The full-length rod allows me to finish seating the ball. You'll notice it has a guide here so that I don't damage the crown. Ram that nice and tight down to the bottom. You want to make sure that the ball is tight against the powder. You want the powder nice and tightly packed without any air gaps to avoid, explosions. Next up, I have to wind the wheel. So I'm going to pull this trigger to engage it. And then we'll put the spanner wrench on the side that fits. There we go. Counterclockwise, about 3/4 of a turn on this particular gun. Now the wheel is cocked and ready, and next I'm going to fill the priming pan. In theory, you could do this with 4F powder. The owner of this particular rifle has found that 3F works just as well, and then it's one less thing that you have to carry with you. Now, ideally, I want to keep the serrations of that wheel clear so that the pyrite sits nice and flush on the steel. If I were going to wait to fire, I would now press this button to close the pan and keep it protected. Since I'm ready to shoot, we'll leave that nice and open. Last thing to do before firing is lift the pyrite into position on the wheel. Now, we're ready to fire as soon as I pull the trigger. And I even made a hit. Firing a muzzleloader like this, or a flintlock, or a matchlock, one of the interesting things that you notice is that there's a very long lock time. And that means the time from when you actually pull the trigger to when the gun fires. And in this case, you actually have to wait for the wheel to start spinning, to create sparks, to ignite the powder in the pan, and then to ignite the main charge, and then the bullet to leave the muzzle. And that kind of looks like it all happens in an instant, but compared to a modern gun where you pull the trigger and hit a primer and things go off, this happens far slower. This is a difficult test of marksmanship if you are shooting at serious targets, because you have to hold this on target through that whole sequence. If you want to get really good at shooting, get good at shooting one of these. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you know more about wheel locks now than you did when you first clicked on the video. If you did enjoy it, make sure to subscribe to the channel, both on YouTube and Full30, and check out Arms Heritage Magazine if you're looking for a good magazine subscription on interesting historical firearms. Thanks for watching.